In all of our countries at the moment, in all the sort of liberal Western democracies, we've become incredibly bad at talking. And because we've become bad at talking, we've become bad at thinking.
In the last few months, there has been a flurry of loud and angry debates about what can be said and what ideas can be expressed.
Why did the mob keep coming for people who misspoke on things to do with gender or race or sexuality? And people learn from that. They learn not to speak.
Why do you believe you were fired?
That's the sort of dark stuff you get into if you don't have a more honest conversation. I think it's the self-appointed task of those of us who do not have wobbly hierarchies over us to speak. One of the things I think a lot of us have started to notice and become worried about in recent years is weaponization of identity. You're not talking about politics. You are only fighting a battle to win. I'm not up for equality and then pretend that men and women don't exist, or that gender is just something you perform. I'm not just agreeing to say whatever the crazy shit is that everyone's being told to say today. They say that I'm the bigot. They don't mention that I'm gay because it doesn't help them. We have to find a way to de-derange ourselves and get on to things that we ought to be doing. I don't think there's any harm in open conversation. We could answer lots of things we need to answer. We could get to the truth. We can do an immense amount of good with that, as a species, as people.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is...
The first time I saw Douglas Murray was on stage at the O2 Arena in front of a packed house of 7,000 or 8,000 people. He was moderating a debate between Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris. Jordan came in the studio here the next day to talk about his ideas, and now Douglas is out with his book called The Madness of Crowds. And he's here to challenge what we think we know about race and gender and identity. Douglas has been writing for places like The Spectator and The Times and The Wall Street Journal for many, many years, and he's pushing back on a narrative you might have heard on social media or other forms of media, and he thinks we've gone too far in some of these categories. I don't agree with everything Douglas has to say, but I think it's good to have an alternative point of view so we can debate some of these ideas. So I look forward to your comments below, and I hope you enjoy my time with Douglas. This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Douglas Murray, the British author, journalist, and political commentator. You are an associate editor of the British political and cultural magazine The Spectator, and also write for The Times and The Wall Street Journal. Your new book, The Madness of Crowds, Gender, Race, and Identity, reveals the new culture wars playing out in our workplaces, schools, and homes in the name of social justice, identity politics, and intersectionality. Douglas, welcome to London Real.
It's a great pleasure to be with you.
Great to have you here. I wondered if we could just start and ask, you know, after your previous book, The Strange Death of Europe, why write this book next? Why write this book now? And I guess part of me wants to ask you, is this what everyone's thinking on the inside anyways, and just not talking about?
That's what I think.
Okay.
In The Strange Death of Europe, I looked at immigration questions in Europe, Islam, and other topics most people want to keep away from. And I found, to my enormous pleasure, a wonderful audience in all sorts of countries, so many countries, and so many people who just seemed to me, and this is the best thing ever for an author, because as an author you put a book out and you don't know if anyone's going to read it, but seemed to me to gain satisfaction and pleasure, encouragement in a way, from the fact that somebody was thinking about this and was trying to address the things they were trying to address. And what I realized was, of course, is that in all of our countries at the moment, in all the sort of liberal Western democracies, we've become incredibly bad at talking. And because we've become bad at talking, we've become bad at thinking. And I'd noticed the things that are the main subjects in the madness of crowds. I'd noticed them for years, and I started looking into them. Why did people's careers keep on getting destroyed over the same things? Why did the mob keep coming for people who misspoke on things to do with gender or race or sexuality? And what was really going on? And I wanted to look into that. I wanted to explain it. And to say basically what I think people want to be thinking about. Because I don't think there's any harm in open conversation. I don't think there's any harm in actual exchange of ideas. I have a real confidence that bad ideas get chased out by good ones. I've got a sort of unbelievable confidence in this idea. And I think our societies don't have that confidence anymore. In fact, we seem terrified of ideas, terrified of bad ideas. The bad ideas might catch on and then we'll all become bad. No, if you allowed yourself to have the conversation, then the bad ideas can't win. So, yeah, having trodden on one set of landmines, I decided to go hopping merrily across all the rest.
Were you concerned when you published your previous book that you might be completely vilified and no one was going to read it and people were going to hate you?
I don't know. I was. I've written 5 books now, and wrote my first book when I was 18. And I view it as being, you write things, you put them out there, you hope there's a readership. But I don't particularly mind about the response. I mean, you want a good response, but that's not why I write. I wasn't so worried about criticism on the last book. I was worried about some of the subjects I was over then are really dangerous subjects. And I know that to my own cost, and a lot of friends have discovered that at their own cost. So I was worried about that a little bit. But again, I mean, you have to weigh these things up. Is it better to talk or not to talk, to speak or not to speak? And I think it's better to speak.
And that's really what this book is about. It's about having these conversations that right now are unpopular, and typically, maybe mostly on social media, seem to be completely dominating the conversation and going in very, very strange ways. And I know you travel the world and meet people. I meet people all the time, and yet I don't have these conversations with real people in person. They seem to a lot of times happen out there.
What sort of conversation?
The ones where we are vilifying someone for doing this, or there's a big stink about someone saying something about,
the scandal culture.
Yeah, all of that seems to sometimes happen mostly in the Twitterverse and not always in real life.
That's true, but sometimes these two things meet. In fact, they meet a lot these days.
Yeah.
You see, I think we're all lying about a whole range of things, and mainly to do with these issues I address in The Madness of Crowds. And I think that there's a cost to that, as I say, of bad ideas seeping into the whole system. And individuals in their lives, I think, know this and can feel it. Not everybody, but broadly speaking by now, if you don't think that the sort of woke intersectional culture is coming for you, then it's only because you're self-employed. Like, the only people I know who aren't now worried about this are self-employed. They don't go into an office. They don't need to speak to people. I mean, everybody you see, people used to think it was just the education field or academia or something. And then one of the things I discovered as I was researching this book was, no, it's everywhere. It's like the corporate world. People in big banks and big corporations and energy companies and media, of course. They all have these diversity departments and diversity enforcement departments and human resources departments and all these sorts of things, which are in some companies the only really growing bit of the company. I mean, they're doing really well, some of these human resources people. But so many people I've spoken to in recent years, they're trying to work this stuff out because it's all being imposed on them. And of course, it's got some good in it. It's got some good intentions in it. It's just what it's going to lead us to all is hell. So everybody's sort of thinking about this, but they're not able to speak about it. And if they do, they are a serious likelihood of losing their job. I mean, there are very, very famous examples of people who've just slipped up once. You know, Tim Hunt, Nobel Prize-winning scientist, does a joke at a conference in South Korea, and one woman in the room says that it's a sexist joke, and by the time he's back in the UK, he's fired from every position. Every position. There are cases, famous cases like the James Damore case in Google. You know, Google says they want some ideas. This, you know, tech guy gives some ideas, bang, he's out. And people learn from that. They learn not to speak, not to air worries and concerns. So I think it's the self-appointed task of those of us who do not have wobbly hierarchies over us to speak.
And that's why writers can talk about this stuff more freely than a lot of other people.
I think we're the only people who can now.
Right. And with James at Google, it was interesting because he really put together a very articulate argument about talking about, I think it was why there are more men coders than women at Google. And Google's an intelligent company, but at the same time, they were living in a reactionary culture and they kind of had to do something. And so the smartest decision for them was to get rid of him. But it didn't really make a lot of sense logically.
Well, that's because there are lies we tell ourselves. And you need to enforce the lie. And you need to enforce the lie by punishment beatings of truth tellers. So if you say, maybe there are some differences between the sexes, whoa, you're already in trouble. I mean, you're going into dangerous terrain already. And really what it is there are a whole set of things in our society that we don't look at because we know what the answers can't be. And if somebody comes up with one of the answers that it can't be, you've got to shut them up. You've got to get rid of them.
What's an example of that?
Well, as I say, the Damore case is a very good example.
Right.
But that happens with some regularity. I mean, because there are very painful things that keep coming up. I mention in the book, in the race chapter, one of the reasons I'm so worried about this retreat to identity and this retreat to characteristics is everything down the road from it is hell. And I write in the race chapter in The Madness of Crowds about the Harvard admissions scandal, which is extraordinary. And there is an example of trying not to come to certain conclusions and as a result, doing terrible things. This is, for anyone who doesn't know, this is a lawsuit taken out against Harvard by a group of Asian students who say that the admissions procedure, in order to try to introduce fairness into the admissions process at Harvard and to allow people of various ethnic backgrounds to get in, was prejudiced against Asian students because they knew that more Asian students would be able to get in than other ethnic groups, and so they downgraded all Asian applicants on character traits without meeting them. And that's the sort of dark stuff you get into if you don't have a more honest conversation. And, you know, I understand some of the fear because honest conversations can be dangerous anyway. They can be risky. They can certainly be hurtful. But in the end, what's better? Going through a bit of that pain or making an entire society go through the pain of constantly reinforcing lies?
You make this analogy in the book with St. George and slaying the dragon. Maybe you can talk about that because you kind of look back and say, okay, we were fighting for women's rights, we were fighting for gay rights and racial rights kind of in the 50s, 60s, 70s and made some great progress and then kept fighting. And now we're to a point where a lot of people want to fight, but we're not sure if there's anything to kill. Maybe you could explain that.
Yeah, it's a wonderful phrase that the late Australian political philosopher Ken Minogue came up with in a book of his called The Liberal Mind. He identified a certain type of person who is keen on the revolutionary attitude, keen to be at the barricades. He called it St. George in retirement syndrome, that St. George, after slaying the dragon and getting all the acclaim of slaying the dragon, might be tempted to go around the land finding more dragons to slay. And there being a deficit of dragons in the land, might end up swinging his sword at smaller and smaller beasts until eventually he might be found swinging his sword at thin air. Well, I don't say that there's no dragon-like thing left to slay in our society. I don't say that everything's perfect, but there is a lot in that, in the febrile, furious atmosphere of our times, where when things have never been better, they're portrayed as if they've never been worse. For all minorities, for women, and this idea, I understand why people have it. I mean, I understand why people wish they'd been with Martin Luther King at the March on Washington. I have a few friends who were there, and they tell me about it, and it's fantastic. It's just thrilling in the telling. I understand that people might want to be there. I understand that some people wish they'd been at the Stonewall Inn, I get that. But I would urge that instead of thinking, therefore, I will fight as hard now as they did then, even if the stakes are minimal or non-existent, I would say, why not just enjoy the fruits of your predecessors' legacies and bravery and do something better with your life now? But that isn't the attitude of our time. The attitude of our time is an audition after the fact to be right in the center of the melee.
Now, you chose to break this book down into 4, I guess, issues or types. So it's race, gay, women, and trans. Was that difficult to nail it down to those 4? Was it ever going to be 3 or 5?
There were a couple more I could have done and decided not to. You could put some of the green stuff in this,
right? Because
it's definitely taking on whatever the debates on science. There's definitely a religious aspect to it now. I think is almost undebatable.
You say religious. Explain that.
Oh, the paying of indulgences in carbon tax, the belief in primordial original sin, the expiation of guilt. It's got something that most post-religion religions don't have, in that it not only has the guilt but the way to atone for the guilt, which is clever and attractive. I could also have done one I did think of but decided to avoid because it sort of seeps through the whole thing, is mental health. I think there's a huge discussion to be had about all sorts of complex things about why mental health has become the issue it has, what in it is totally plausible and what we're behind on understanding, and what is being overreached in that debate. But I decided that those were, the green one has been done quite a lot, and the mental health one I think needs a lot of time and space on its own. And it's not quite as deep a tripwire at the moment because it's still sort of asserting itself as an issue. Yeah. But everything to do with LGBT, relations between the sexes and race are just, they're the nature of almost every day's news. They are the thing that can get anyone, irrespective of everything else they've done. I give the example of the Nobel Prize winner Tim Hunt, but a cabinet, we're sitting in London, former defense minister here was found to have 15 years earlier put his hand on a female journalist's knee. She smacked it away and said, if you do that again, you're getting a smack around the chops. That was it. That was the end of the incident. Now you can say, well, that's bad behavior, obviously. But 15 years after that happened, somebody wrote about it, and he had to resign. And I just find that fascinating, because that's a defense minister. Like that's a serious role,
right.
And it's seriously interesting that, as I say, I'm not saying that's great. Like I'm not saying everyone should put their hands on the knees of the person beside them at dinner, anything like it. It's just the assertion of a certain set of moral norms in our time, including behavioral norms, is shifting, has been shifting very, very fast, with, I think, just not very much discussion. And I mean, that's why I wanted to do the women chapter in the way I did, was to say, what are the things, at the same time as there are things that we pretend we know about that we don't really know about. Like, we don't know as much about gay as we pretend. We know relatively little, and we definitely know very little, nearly nothing about trans. But we pretend to be incredibly certain about these things. Oh, well, that person's trans. They say they're trans. Yeah. But at the same time, you have these things which everyone knew till yesterday, and they pretended they didn't know, or they've forgotten, or we never did know. And that one, the most striking example of that is in relations between the sexes.
Okay. And you have 3 interludes in here, which is interesting, and one is on forgiveness.
Yeah.
Or trying to, like you said, maybe look at something that happened in the past, right, and maybe not react to it and understand and forgive it. Also, you mentioned technology in there, which is kind of fascinating. And then I think the Marxist piece there.
Yeah.
I'd love to talk on each one of the 4 issues, but maybe the technology is something that links a lot of it together, and maybe it's something worth talking about.
Yeah.
I watched a very interesting discussion with Jack Dorsey and Joe Rogan. You were on Joe's show. He actually went on twice, and it was interesting. We brought his lawyer back the second time, and they went through all of their policies on how they moderate Twitter, and how they're very sensitive to a lot of issues around trans issues and things. And they have their laws, which have nothing to do with any other laws in sovereign states, but it's kind of the way they moderate things. And I found it really interesting about how this is okay, that's not okay. A lot of things around trans, like you said, which I guess maybe we're just starting to understand. What do you see in that space?
And you know they lie.
About what they do or why they do it. Because it's a corporation.
You know they lie.
Explain that.
The tech companies, I mean, I have actually seen the lists of some of the words that are the things that get you in trouble. Twitter is one of the worst, because Twitter doesn't tell people.
So double standard, you're saying.
Oh, yeah.
They have a list of what gets you in trouble, and then there's what really gets you in trouble.
And the ways that they mute people and pretend they don't. The way they pretend they just can't do things at the moment, which they do. And it's political. It's political. And it's taken a while for some people to realize that, but it's nakedly political. The same with Google. I give an example in the tech chapter, as you know, about Google Images. And it's just fascinating, because most people it doesn't occur to most people that when you type something into the search engine, what you're getting back isn't true, or not real, or not really representative of what you wanted to get. And one of the examples I give is Google Images, which is just fascinating. If you go to Google Images and you say, I would like to see, type in, anyone can do it now, I mean, or they might, now I've pointed it out, they may skew the algorithm back, but say you want to see photos of gay couples, just put gay couples into Google image search. You'll get lots of nice photos of nice, happy gay couples. A lot of mixed race couples, just to, accentuate the positive. But there's lots of nice gay couples. Happy gay life. Do straight couples. You don't get what you asked for. You don't get what you asked for. You get a lot of gays, awful lot of gays.
When you Google straight couples?
Yeah.
Okay.
You get a lot of mixed race, a lot of black photos of black couples. You get it doesn't want to give you what you're asking.
Why?
Because.
And is this intentional?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
So some people thought this was just machine learning fairness, which I explain about in the book, but it's not just machine learning fairness, which is a fascinating subject on its own. It's machine learning fairness with a human intervention. The same thing happens if you do, here's another really dangerous one, do black couples. You get black couples, you get happy black couples. And just picture after picture. Do white couples, you get black couples. Mixed race, you get very early, you get a mixed race gay couple with black children.
And so why?
Why? Because Google wants to say, how dare you be searching for that, you bigot. What kind of a monster would be searching for straight couples or white couples? Bigot. We'll show you. We'll give you gays. We'll give you black gays. We'll force feed you things you didn't want, you didn't ask for, because only a bigot would be searching for that. And now, it's fascinating, but the most interesting thing is that most people don't know it's going on. As I say, I mean, it's not like, there are all these stats on the number of school-aged children that think that when you Google a question, that things come up in order of truth. There are all these studies of that, and you have to. One of the things, of course, with people growing up, children growing up in the internet age, is to make sure they're educated to not think that sort of thing, and it's very hard for them. It's very hard for everybody. But I know very few adults or children who know that this stuff I've just described is going on. And by the way, it's not. I say that what is happening with that in tech is just a sped-up version of something that's happening in the rest of the media. I have a bit of fun in one of the chapters, I think the chapter on gay, about just one day in the life of the New York Times, where the lead business story is 2 pages about a gay Japanese businessman who's come out in his firm. And it's not a problem, because Japan doesn't have a particularly homophobic society or anything. Okay. If you're just like a businessman in New York that morning and you open the business section, why do you need to have just the front 2 pages about a gay Japanese businessman who came out and it wasn't a problem? It's not just a definition of not business news, it's not really news. And the same day had the culture section was a story about how 2 male ballet dancers of the New York City Ballet were dancing together in a scene that had previously been for a man and a woman. And, because obviously it's very important to stress that the otherwise wildly heterosexual world of ballet is, has been gayed up a bit.
And so why is this happening in the New York Times?
Well, because
are they responding to what people want?
They're doing the same thing.
Right. That's their agenda.
That's the thing that is happening, and which the tech companies are just doing faster.
Okay.
There's just it's partly a post-Trump thing, it's partly a post-Brexit thing. We've got a lot of our sense-making mechanisms have broken down, and a lot of our organs of, in fact, all of our organs of communication have broken down pretty much. And it's partly because of this, that instead of being the thing that tells us what is happening, they have to stand equidistant between the facts and the public and negotiate between the two. Because you can't have the public, because they can't be trusted with facts. You've got to interpret them for the public. Now, of course, that's always happened to some degree. But this version, the retributive version of it, that's like, giving you more gay stuff than you want will be good for you, because it'll smoke out the bigots.
Okay, so they're giving you more gay stuff than you want, more pro-minority group stuff than you want, more pro-trans stuff than you want,
oh, yeah,
and more pro-feminist stuff than you want, or
yeah, and I think and the hysterical attitude always coming to the fore. I mean, we have this with the sort of Margaret Atwood obsession, the idea that that it's likely that women in America are soon to be living in a situation akin to that of women in Tehran in 1980.
I mean, I read the New York Times too, and I see this as well.
Yeah.
And there's more. It's the environmental stuff and the anti-Trump stuff. It's just like, it just kind of front loads with that, to where I can kind of see the article, I'm like, oh, of course it's that. And it's really noticeable.
Yeah, and they are doing it. There's an easy way to do this, which you just blame the New York Times, you blame the editors. No, it's the public as well. Because You know, recently the New York Times ran a headline about Trump called after another massacre in the US, called for unity in the face of racism, I think it was.
Yeah.
It's just, it's what you'd expect, what you'd hope the president would do. He does it, of course, you know, that's what he does. And the New York Times just reports that, you know, president calls for unity. And the backlash from the Times subscribers means that they have to change the headline so it doesn't look like they're saying that that is what Trump said and they're not criticizing it. They're like, they have to make it into, well, he said that, but he wouldn't really mean it because we know he's a bigot. Because that's what the readers are demanding. So it's not just that the sort of people in power or in influence of it. We're doing this to ourselves. We're trying to cut off our sources of information ourselves.
Are we ashamed of who we are? Are we
I don't know. I think a lot of people are bored.
Bored. And they want the drama. They want a victim. They want a battle.
Funnily enough, there's a reading of Hegel where this is predicted, where the person at the end of history, as Hegel would have it, benefits from all of these things. All of the forebears, gets to the position, has been got to the position that one would want to be in, of being in a free state, a free society with all of these attainments in the way of rights. And that at that point, we might rebel for the sake of rebellion, for addiction to the rebellious attitude, and thus bring the whole thing down. So Hegel saw some of that, and others have as well. It's not far off what we're doing. It's not far off. And I think, you know, people understate the effect of things like boredom. Like, people want to be heroic. Not everyone, but a lot of people want to be sort of heroic or seem to be heroes or seem to be virtuous. Just because you lose religion doesn't mean you lose the things that people want from religion, including the perception of your peers that you are a person of virtue. And if you lose the old religious virtues, you've got to create new ones. So
no more crusades. You got to make up your own crusade.
Yeah, and my gosh, have they made them up? And with all those other things, of course, we know from Girard and others that the need to get a scapegoat, you know? And it's particularly useful if the scapegoat is somebody who has committed a crime which you've committed a version of yourself in the past and need to expiate your own mixed feelings about that, your contorted human feelings about that by taking it out so vengefully on the person you can find.
Okay. Is this in the Me Too movement?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I had Rose McGowan in that seat about 6 months ago, and it was a very interesting conversation with Rose, and I appreciate what she went through. And at the end I said, Rose, I'm seeing things like Neil deGrasse Tyson, whose season of Cosmos has been put on hold, and from what I could read, it was thin, really thin. And I said, how do you feel about things like this happening where entire careers are being taken out where, look, I don't know the details. Of course, he was later exonerated and the show came back, but it looked thin. And I'd had Neil on the show as well.
Right.
And she looked at me and she said, that's collateral damage.
Right.
And I was really surprised she said that, but she said, yeah, it's
I
not right.
I admire her for saying it.
Yeah,
I admire
did
her
too.
for saying it.
She said, that's just what happened of the course of these other things happening. And it was interesting to hear that.
An interesting question to ask in that situation, I had this yesterday with a journalist from The Guardian I was in discussion with, is because I hear a version, it's very few people are as honest as she was to you, but there was an example I give it in the book of a CNN presenter who says at the height of Me Too, okay, maybe it is an overcorrection. Well, we're due an overcorrection.
Right, I remember that.
Now, one of the questions I would have for such a person, I had it yesterday with this Guardian journalist, was if that is your view, please tell us what your mechanisms are for correcting the overcorrection, when you might see it as being necessary, and who might call it. Because I think in a lot of the rights claims, I think this is the case in LGBT issues, women's issues, racial equality issues, it's understandable if when you have a group that have been oppressed in some way in the past, that you get to equality, and at the point you're at equality, you might want to run a bit further to make up for lost time, or sort of hit further in order to get the pendulum more correctly in the position you want to get it to. You might overcorrect in order to at some point swing back to normal. That's why I say we've had this strange period, we are still in this strange period where in some ways it's better to be gay than straight. Better. You got an extra card. You got something going for you. Not like that loser straight guy. Okay? So it went from gays 60 years ago against the law to equality, one of the most magnificent movements. And then you go to better. And I loathe better. I loathe it. And the same thing happens in other situations.
And this is speaking as a gay man.
Sure.
Are people surprised when they find that out about you, based on what you write about?
I don't know. I mean, I loathe arguments from one's own characteristics. So, I mean,
even though that's a lot what happens out there.
Oh, it's the only thing that happens out there.
Right.
I noticed it years ago in audiences, people would say, speaking as a, and I just bristled. It doesn't matter. The content of your point is what matters, not what you're speaking. I don't care if you're a Puerto Rican woman or a Puerto Rican man or an American, or from Manchester. It doesn't matter. What's your point? Now, everyone else pretty much in this age has decided it's only about the speaker, nothing about the speech. But yes, just to get back to this point, this same thing has been happening others. So, and I quote the very brilliant young American writer called Coleman Hughes, I quote in the introduction. He says, at his time at university in America, he noticed that there were people who seemed to behave around him, he happens to be black, he seemed to behave around him as if there was some special heightened moral knowledge that came from being black. Now, of course, there are a lot of black people who will have some heightened moral knowledge depending on their circumstances, just as there will be some white people and some Chinese people and all sorts of people who will have some heightened moral knowledge. But the idea that everybody with a particular characteristic has it is like the flip side of racism, to put it at its politest. And so we got to this stage with black that's a bit like the gay one, like it's better. Again, it's understandable, if particularly with America's history of racial problems. Yeah. It's understandable. Like, when would you know you've lent too heavily on that? And when have you gone past equal and got to better? And how can we just get back to equal again?
Because going past can be very destructive and dangerous too.
And the Me Too thing hits the women's one on this because, okay, we'll overcorrect. Okay, we might punish a generation of heterosexual men. Good. We'll give them some of that. Yeah, really? When will you stop that? And who will call time? Who will stop this zero-sum game of vengefulness? And by the way, what's interesting about that, among other things, that this is an English-speaking world phenomenon in particular. I don't say it doesn't happen elsewhere, but it's particularly bad in the English-speaking world. And I have an example of this, by the way, which is on my mind a lot because I travel all the time. I think I said to you, I'm in a different country every week, pretty much. And so I get around a lot, and versions of this are everywhere. But France, for instance, when the Me Too thing happens, there is when people see that here is somebody who's clearly been behaving in an inappropriate way and possibly trials permitting an illegal way. That has to be addressed. It has to be stopped and an example made. Absolutely. But when it becomes clear that you've got things like the Ansari case, a comedian in America who suffered, I think, as Barry Weiss said at the time, bad date etiquette perhaps on both parts, a bit fuzzy and so on.
Yeah.
When you see those people being destroyed, it's really striking to me that it was France that has 100 very prominent women, some of whom are friends of mine in France, actresses, intellectuals, thinkers, some leading figures in France who happen to be women, write a joint letter saying, this has gone too far. Men and women have to still get on. We have to get on. And
why do they say that?
Well, because, because they're more sensible about that. For all sorts of reasons, which are fascinating in themselves. But broadly, could we have found 3 or 4 women in equivalently prominent positions in America or Britain at the height of that to say, look, we might be overcorrecting, No, but everyone wanted to keep their heads down, including women. I know, but of course they did, because this is how people's lives get destroyed. You don't want to be the one person who sticks your head above the parapet, just as everyone else of your sex is stampeding the other way.
We saw it happen. A couple people stuck their heads up and they were gone. So, and why the French? Culturally? Are they not in this kind of this madness of the English-speaking Twitterverse echo chamber? Are they just kind of removed from it one step?
Well, I think, you know, you have to be so careful what you wish for. I remember years ago, you know, sometimes something happens and you feel responsible and you realize you can't be responsible, but just something you said once. But some years ago, I remember dinner with some friends, and I can't remember what it was. It was something just mad that happened that day. It's about 10 years ago. And I remember saying to a friend, God, don't you sometimes want a dose of Presbyterianism to come back into the society? You know, a bit of Puritanism would come in useful here. And I remember one of these friends being quite shocked. He said, Douglas, you can't mean that. I said, well, I sort of don't really, but it would be, you know, you could quite do with a moral force that reins some of this in a little bit.
Right.
And then, of course, it did happen. It just came back, as always happens, from a totally different direction than any that I could foresee. It didn't come up from like black-hatted Puritan Cromwellian figures from the 17th century. It came with a movement calling itself a social justice movement that decided to embed a new form of norms, particularly in relations between the sexes, that makes the Puritans look like Play-Doh.
And that's what's happening
That's
today.
what's happening.
Yeah.
I mean, a friend of mine in her 50s, I said to me recently, we were on holiday together, and she said, Douglas, darling, I feel like people must have felt at the Regency just before Queen Victoria came in. She said, I mean, I like sex, you know. And I like men. She said, I just, you know, I feel like a libertine.
You mentioned that this might be rooted in the economic collapse in 2008, and there's this weird Marxism going on here. And it was kind of interesting to read that in the book. And obviously it's part of kind of the interlude, which is maybe kind of the underlying fabric or structure about how these things come up. Can you just talk about that idea, that theory?
Yeah, in between doing these main chapters on gay, women, race, and trans, I wanted to flesh some of it out, where it comes from. I'm often asked, particularly by students, young people, are like, where does this come from? And of course, you can trace some of it. Some of it's very hard to trace. Some of it you just got to, you know, keep looking into. But one of the things that's very clear is the Marxist substructure of some of this. It keeps revealing itself in, among other things, the perception that this is all to do with power. See, I think this is a really ugly game we've all got caught in. And it's basically being done on Marxist and post-Marxist terms. The perception that everything in our lives is mainly to do with power. A lot of people imbibe this from Foucault, who, by the way, I mean, he's the most cited scholar. If you look at Google Scholar, he's the most cited scholar, Foucault. It's not a small figure. He's cited like 4 times more than Einstein in academic papers. And he's a very brilliant thinker in a way. But he embeds a whole set of really ugly ideas, and one is viewing basically everything, including sexual relations, solely through the lens of power. And I think that power is significant. I think it's interesting, it's important. But if you said to most people, well, what motivates you in your life? How many people would say power? No. Love, family, friendships, forgiveness, God, all sorts of things. Power. Yeah, it's a force. There are a lot of forces in the world. And there's something perverse about seeing everything through this prism. But the Marxist part of it is partly to do with that, and the idea there's a sort of structure in society, which in the old days was the workers at the bottom holding up the structure, and on their shoulders the middle classes, and then up and up and up until you get to the sort of aristocracy and capital. Well, that was the sort of the Marxist understanding of how society was structured, which was a perverse understanding in its own way, for lots of reasons. But there's a version of this that is in the social justice movement, which is that basically the pyramid is differently organized. I mean, you might have gays and black people and people of color and women in various bits, but at the top is capital. and particularly white male elderly capital. And that keeps revealing itself as the version of society that a lot of people believe is our society. It's just that. And therefore you need to bring it down. And this is a sort of form of Marxist interpretation, which I also trace, by the way, that the number of Marxist academics and writers and thinkers who were working on this, I mean, it didn't come from nowhere. They've been working on this in the 1970s and 80s, particularly in the 80s, and two thinkers in particular I cite, Laclau and Mouffe, say in the 80s, very explicitly, as the whole appalling communist experiment is finally starting to fall down. I don't know if they realize at that point that it is, but it's running out of steam. They say, basically the working class let us down. The working class didn't do what we thought they were going to do, which of course was one of the glorious problems for the communists, the working class let us down, and therefore we need to find the revolutionary forces in other movements. And these Marxists are saying in the 80s, I quote them, we need to find them in identity movements like sexual minorities, racial minorities. There will be groups of feminists, and so on. And we will use them. Now, the reason why I think this is interesting is because one of the things I think a lot of us have started to notice and become worried about in recent years is the weaponization of identity, the weaponization of it. And I feel that's, I mean, to cite the thing I said, I don't make arguments from identity, but I worry about this with the gay thing. I don't like these things where it looks like gay is being used to batter something else down. I don't like it when I see it with other groups as well. And the one that's clearest with that is trans. See, you can absolutely, there is, and I lay out in my chapter on trans, there is a very plausible set of steps you can take to try to work out where in the trans argument there is something plausible. And all of this is to say people can do what they want, if they're an adult. But just to say, here is a bit that is definitely, there's something there we need to address, there's something we need to think about, and then all the way to whoa, 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 whoa. Now, if you work that along, you always find whenever there's somebody who's basically got the revolutionary, communist, Marxist-like interpretation of history in their minds still, they will always go to the furthest bit of the trans one. Always. I mean, AOC in America, in her early weeks in office, does a fundraiser for a British, very controversial group in Britain called Mermaids, which advocates the giving of puberty blockers to children who believe that they are trans. That is very, very controversial. And I'm not at all in favour of it myself, having looked at it and spoken with people who've gone through this. But what business is it of an American congresswoman to encourage the taking of hormones by teenagers in Britain?
So why does she do that? Because that's what...
I think it's like the thing I was describing with the Google search engine. It's an attempt to derange us. It's an attempt to batter down the white, patriarchal, heteronormative society. And it's like, good. We will make you say that the big bearded man with a penis is a woman. We're going to make you do it. And if you fail, we'll call you every name we can think of and we'll try to destroy you. There is no other explanation as to why they don't have the debate at every stage up to then. I say in the book, I owe this observation to my friend Eric Weinstein, that why didn't they start with intersex rights? Intersex, for people who don't follow all of this too closely, is people born with unclear genitalia or genital abnormalities, including in some cases evidence of sexual organs of both sexes. This, by the way, I mean, it's not that common. It's quite a bit more common than I think people realize. The medical profession knew about this always. It was a quiet, it's an embarrassing, tricky thing. Now, somebody born with an intersex condition deserves all of the sympathy imaginable. I mean, it's not going to ruin your life necessarily, but it's a bloody hard place to start. It's definitely suboptimal situation to start your life in. But there was never a movement for these people, you know? the rights campaigners stampeded straight past the intersex people to big bearded man with penis, say it's a woman. And I think that's because they didn't, it's a very counterintuitive thing until you see it. We might assume that people try to get coalitions together to agree with them and then do something productive. Sometimes people don't want a coalition, they just want a battering ram. Get that, smash that. Get the big bearded man with a penis and use it to smash down our enemy.
And that's the weaponization of identity. And they got the biggest weapon.
It's an awkward way of putting it, but yeah.
That's a fascinating way to take down the power structure. And obviously it's effective to a certain extent.
Yes, yeah, it obviously is effective because it is deranging people and it's demoralizing. I mean, you see this?
And what do you say? And let's actually talk about that term, white privileged male, which both of us are.
I don't like any of those terms.
Well, me neither, but I'm sure people would call me that. What do you make of those terms, just as they are? Bret Easton Ellis almost named his book that, and he just truncated it to white. And he's echoed some similar things about this. And as a gay man, he's called out a lot of this absolute ludicrous behavior by the gay community. He's been called out by the community for years about not supporting and getting in line with everything they're saying, from Academy Awards to whatever. So yeah, your thoughts?
Well, I don't like when I hear white. I don't like the thing because it returns us to race when I think we should be trying to avoid it. Because if you open up that chasm, there's hell in there. So I think we should step back from it. But the way in which white in white privilege is now weaponized just disturbs me enormously because I know what's going to be played back down the road. I know it already because I see it. There's already a playback happening, and I find it every single country I go. I noticed it for the last 3 years. Everybody's talking about IQ. Everywhere. Not everyone, but everywhere that discussion is starting. And I think what's happening is people are fed up being told they're privileged because they're white, and they're starting to look into what is the ugliest discussion in the world, which is inherited IQ differentials. And that's it. I say this in the book, it's like that might be a weapon some people are going to use to hit back.
It's a bigger weapon.
So I'm like, can we just, before that happens, avoid this whole thing? Can we go back to equal? Can we not have people's skin pigmentation in any situation used against them, including white? And then you get onto the thing. Male, I'd say the same thing. I can think of lots of communities I've been to around the world where there are plenty of men who have never worked or have worked intermittently, have provided to the extent they can for their families, for themselves, but you think they're privileged? You think they're privileged? You think that white men in the north of England in former mill towns are privileged? You think all my forebears were privileged? You know? And then you get to the level beneath that, which is, who's to call any of this anyway? Like, what the hell do you know about the person you're doing that to? Well, you've got white male privilege. Okay. Work out in every single situation the legitimacy of that claim today. Because this happened the other day with The Guardian. Guardian writes a leader column, the paper's view, about the release of the memoirs of David Cameron. Not a prime minister I'm an enormous supporter of anyway. But David Cameron's memoirs come out. The Guardian attacks him. The Guardian says in its editorial that David Cameron, that the setbacks he had in his life were not real setbacks because of his privilege. And they included the fact that his first son died. Yeah. And they said, even that, him sitting at the deathbed of his own son, wasn't as bad as it would be for other people because he had privilege. That's the kind of dehumanizing route you go down if you start playing this game. You end up judging the extent to which a father has the right to mourn his child because you're playing a privilege game. And I think, among other things, this game, it cannot be played because it can never be won, because it can't be solved, it can't be ended. We don't know hour by hour where we might be in this hierarchy. Is the person who inherited a huge amount of money, for instance, I'm sadly not in such a situation myself, but let's say a person who inherited a huge amount of money is naturally privileged. Well, they've definitely got one advantage, they've got a load of cash. Does that mean that they are a privileged person in every other aspect of their life? Let's say they have a terrible personal life, you know? Let's say they have a horrible heroin addict problem, or their child does, or their wife does, or their husband. Where do they go exactly in this hierarchy? What about the very well-off person who's not white? Where are they in comparison to a not well-off white person? Where exactly do they meet? If you've got 5 million quid and you're Indian, do you meet the unemployed white person somewhere? Who wants to play this impossible game?
And the next thing that's talked about is then the reparation game.
Right.
Which is kind of a derivative of privilege somehow.
Well, I've got a couple of fast-track ways to try to stop that. One is my idea, maybe I could try it out on you, that I would favour reparations to try to address the problem of the most prejudiced against people in history being, after the fact, rewarded for the prejudice that's happened to their people. And that's why the American government should send people to every household. Everyone is white, everyone is black in America, and takes the money from them and give it to the Jews. Would that sort everything out? No. I think it might make things a lot worse. But I mention it because
you're choosing one group for reparations.
But would anyone deny that of all the people in history, the Jews have probably had it worst? If you want to play that game, I suggest that people don't. But if you wanted to play that game, you could do that.
Yeah, and some Swiss banks cut some checks about 10 years ago.
Right.
For that.
But my point, you could do it endlessly.
Yeah.
I mean, you could. Not just from the Holocaust, but the pogroms before, and much, much more. The expulsion of Jews from England, the expulsion of Jews from Spain. We could do this on everything. I mean, there have been some people recently who have actually even advocated. I mean, the craziness never stops. Some people have actually argued that there should be reparations for gays. But I mean, so among other things, this is one of the reasons why we can't get the present in a sane light. Because we're so insane about the past. Like, we have such a bad understanding of history. Obviously, it's because in America and Britain and everywhere else, history is taught so badly. People learn almost nothing, and they can put almost nothing in context. And they suffer from the fallacy that they're better than their forebears because they know things their forebears didn't. Like, I know exactly, I would have been anti-Hitler in 1939. Yeah, sure you would, because you know how it turned out. You know who won. If you don't know who won, and no one does as you're going through it, you sure? Are you sure you want to take an easier route? And that's the case with case after case. Why didn't they see the First World War coming? Because they didn't know it was going to be the First World War. And we have this version we do ourselves all the time. And I have a shortcut to that, which is to say to people, one of my editors makes this point to me. He says, assume, because everybody in history did things that we look back at and we say, what were they thinking? A productive thing is to try to work out what we're doing now, and we will be doing things that people after us say, what were they thinking? Try to work them out now in order to avoid doing them. That's a productive thing to do. That's much more productive than doing this strange trawl through history to find victims and perpetrators, and work out exactly the cash balance that people should get as a result. All, by the way, ignoring the fact that most of history was hell for everyone. And that to be born now is to have absolutely won the historical lottery. It's unbelievable luck.
So concentrate on the present.
And you're not going to get it perfect, but at least don't do the worst things. I give a couple of examples in the book of what I think are the worst things.
What do we do now? If people read this book and they say, okay, Douglas, I think you really have made some great points here. What is the next step?
I think we need to stop this game, get out of this game, the privilege games, the intersectional games, all of this. We need to get out of it and get on to things that we ought to be doing. There's a really great point a friend of mine made recently, was teaching at a university, or went to speak at a university in America, and all the students were asking all these identity questions. And he was like, why are you doing this? Your generation should be working out how we live in underwater cities, how we live on the moon. Why are you doing this? This is so unproductive. My point on top of that is, and it can't be done. It's not a winnable game. But I do think that, I think there's demoralization and an enervation in our societies because we're engaged in a game that's unwinnable. And that's all we're being told to do. Why don't we inject things that we should be doing? You know, I give the example with the feminism issue. Something that brilliant feminist Camille Paglia makes the point. She says, why did feminism basically park motherhood as an issue and not address it? That's a really big one. That's a really big one. I know that, of course, men aren't meant to speak about women because what interest could one half of the species have in the other? But this isn't a small one to miss. That isn't, now of course, the moment you start that, people are, oh, you just want to lock women in the home and make them have, no. I just think that it would be unwise to pretend that one of the most important sources of meaning in anyone's life, if not the most important, is some bureaucratic technicality we'll get onto at some point in the future to address. I'd much rather that we were able to have the discussion about motherhood. And I know from many friends the extent to which not having had that discussion has made life at a certain point unnecessarily harder than it should have been.
And on that same note, are there discussions you think we can be having that are productive in the trans world and in the race world and in the gay worlds?
Yeah, and I think one point of, I mean, 'cause the point of the book is in some ways to not just is to lead people out of this. But one thing I say is, like, where there is a plausible problem, a recognizable problem, why don't we agree on that and address that problem? Like, maybe it's incarceration rates, for instance. Right, let's address that problem. But not, let's say that all the races have historically been against each other. Those people have always been against these people, and that's why we need to get these people against them. No. Locate the things that are unjust, unfair, and why don't we unite in trying to solve some of those? But nobody will agree to solve one of those if they think that after that your desire is to destroy X race of people or humiliate them. Like, we could have a much more fruitful discussion about what sexual norms should be, what dating norms should be, if there wasn't a fear that really some people, not all, but some people want that as the first step to vengeance. That you can't do it if that's the case.
Right. And are there equivalents as well in the gay world and in the trans as well?
Well, I think the gay thing is just, I mean, it's so bonkers. I just, before coming here, by the way, I saw that I've just been attacked by the main gay magazine in the UK and the main gay magazine in America for misgendering Sam Smith, the pop star who came out the other day as non-binary, which I don't believe in. I don't think there's any such thing as non-binary.
Can you explain that?
Well, I'd like him to explain it because he can't. Sam Smith came out as gay some years ago, and then came out a few years later as genderqueer, and then said last week that he's actually non-binary. He doesn't know what that means. And that's, I humbly submit, because it doesn't mean anything. But he says that he wants everyone to refer to him by different pronouns, specifically they, them, plural pronouns. And he said he doesn't know exactly how to explain what it is, but he looks forward to coming back and telling us when he does. And I go, yeah, okay, I'll look forward to that. I'm not mutilating the language until the day you come back and explain this to me, because I've got a fair guess you're never going to come back with what I would regard as a plausible explanation for it. There are lots of ways of playing this, by the way. If I wanted to play the game that the people I'm criticizing play, I could say, you're disappearing gay men. Why are you doing that? Why are you disorientating a young man growing up realizing he might be gay and making him think actually he's a woman a bit of the time? Why are you doing that? I could play that game. I don't. But my point is that because I won't jump on board with the latest crazy shit,
I mean,
because of that, the main gay magazine in the UK and the main gay magazine in America just attacked me for misgendering Sam Smith and say that the person I was arguing it with was like destroying me because they say like that I'm the bigot in this. By the way, they don't mention that I'm gay. They erase that because it doesn't help them. Because what they want is to say like right-wing heterosexual homophobe won't correctly gender Sam Smith. So I screw it up. So they chuck me out of the Church of Gay. Okay, this is politics. This has nothing to do with anything else. These are dying media brands. These are dying media brands which have people left in them who shouldn't be there because the thing shouldn't be there. At the point that gay magazines have to de-gay people when they just disagree on politics, you're not talking about politics. Anything but politics. You're not talking about politics. You're not talking about gay. You are only fighting a battle to win. And I'm not up for that. Same thing that Bret Easton Ellis has landed on. I'm not up for that next. I'm not up for the next phase. I was up for equality. I'm not up for equality and then pretend that men and women don't exist, or that gender is just something you perform, or that somebody who's basically saying, look at me, is actually to be treated as if he's a woman a part of the time. But you can play that again. Women can play that game if they want. I would urge them not to. But women could easily say, how dare you? How dare you pretend you know what it's like to be a woman just because you're feeling a little bit female that day? No. You don't get the right to do that. They could do that. But I'm not going along with the demoralization. I'm not just agreeing to say whatever the crazy shit is that everyone's being told to say today. I want to know what it's about. There's such a thing as genderqueer or non-binary. And by the way, nobody knows what the difference between those two things is because there isn't one, because neither of them exist. If you want to do these things, come back and tell me what they are. Come back when you've got the science. Come back when you've got even a reasonable argument. But I am not demoralizing myself and demeaning myself by doing whatever you want to make me dance to today. No. And I don't want other people to either. I think it's profoundly demoralizing. It's what, I don't know if you've ever had the misfortune of going to a country which, you know, suffered under a totalitarianism. But from my own experiences of occasionally going to such places and traveling for work as a journalist, I know that what the main thing in a society that starts to shut down is make people agree to things they know not to be true, because it demoralizes them. It makes them low. And then in the end, you just, you know, great writers like Milan Kundera have addressed this. In the end, you just, reality becomes, and you just agree with anything. You go along with anything. And it's just so striking in our time that that's all done in the tone of social justice. Wouldn't it be nicer of you, kinder of you, to just go along with the lie? Why do you have to keep stressing the facts? Why do you have to be so interested in the truth?
Especially to these oppressed people.
Sure.
And minorities. This is what kind of made Jordan Peterson famous years ago when he refused, based on freedom of speech, I think, is what he said. I'm not going to use these neutral pronouns, and you can't make me because you're infringing on my freedom of speech.
Well, I know quite a lot of... I know Jordan, and he's a wonderful man. And I know quite a lot of people who've tripped over this wire. And there is a reason which doesn't get highlighted enough. I noticed it with the trans one with friends in the sciences. You see, the scientific method has ruled very successfully, if not ruled, then been predominant very successfully for a couple of centuries in the West. And it's, I think, got an awful lot going for it. You know, we weigh up the evidence, we look at the facts, and then we weigh up what we think is something we should agree to and what can't be. The trans one is so interesting because I noticed from friends who are scientists that the reason why people kept tripping on it was because this was the first time that people were being told not to do what the discipline told them. So, okay, the man says he's a woman, say he's a woman, he is a woman. And there was just, I've noticed it in the last 10 years, I go into it in the book, is that but I can't, because it's not the case. Because I'm a scientist and I know it's not the case. But in universities and much more, it started to be just could you just... I have a great friend, he writes under the name Theodore Dalrymple. He was a prison doctor for most of his life, worked in prisons, and he has amazing stories, of course, as everyone who's been in that situation does. But one of my favourites is that towards the end of his career in the National Health Service in the UK, there was some new jargon, some new form filling. And he was retiring soon, so he didn't really mind anyway. And he's quite an independent, very independent-minded person anyway. But he said one of the questions that this sort of bureaucrat asked him was, he said, have you always and at all times in your life behaved in an ethical manner? And my friend said, I will only answer your question if you answer two questions of mine. The first is, who would ask such a question? And who would answer such a question? And he went on this, he was explaining, nobody could say yes, because nobody has, throughout their entire life, always behaved in an ethical manner. So I can't answer the question because you shouldn't ask such a question. And anyway, the guy, of course, the form-filling bureaucrat ended up saying to him, could you just say yes, and then we can move on? Okay. So, in order to ensure that everyone is behaving ethically, the person from the NHS asks the person to lie so they can move on. that is not that uncommon a thing. Could you just agree to the lie and we can get onto something else?
And that's what's happening here.
It's happening everywhere. And I mean, I have a bunch of friends, people like Jordan and people around the world I'm very lucky to have as friends who partly have become friends because they are the people in all sorts of countries who are the people who said, no, I won't do it. I won't agree to the lie. And they're from an amazing array of countries, an amazing array of disciplines, but they always have that in common. And I like that. I like that trait.
Yeah, it takes fortitude.
More than some people think and less than others.
Yeah.
You know?
So non-binary does not exist. Okay.
No, or at least come back to me when you've worked out what it is, and then we can have a discussion.
Okay. I go swimming at the Hampstead men's pond very often. And about 6 months ago, a bunch of women busted in and jumped in the thing, and it was very surprising because I'm used to only men being there. And they were
nude?
No, there is a nude sunbathing section,
right,
but it wasn't
when
nude.
I said that, I became aware that's the sort of thing that people like excerpt and just use as a GIF.
No.
Is it nude?
It's a nude. So it wasn't. And they came in and they jumped, and we were kind of like, why are you here? And she said, well, a bunch of men went to the women's only pond and walked in and said, I identify as a woman. And they swam around and, I don't know, maybe leered at them. I don't know. And so as a protest, they came to the men's pond to do the same, to protest us.
Sure.
And so it's interesting to see the reaction of the men there, like, well, we didn't do that, and I don't know why you're coming here. And it was a real where the rubber hits the road of the binary thing, and it was just strange to observe.
Did the men mind?
Some were quite offended, and some were like, okay, let's just...
Was anyone like, well, hey?
There were some really interesting arguments, like, well, why? And why should you do this? And we actually just had like the men's pond, and we think that's okay. And you have a great women's pond, and you know, and there's also a mixed pond, and so it was, you know,
it's one of the reasons why I don't want to bang on about the trans thing, but one of the reasons why the trans thing has become so big is because it runs against the issue of half of our species. It's not a small thing, that. It's not a small thing. If a man says he's a woman and therefore can be in all female spaces, I don't think all women should be made to feel like phobes if they're not comfortable with that. I think that's wrong.
Yeah.
And again, I admire the many women, some of whom I know and some of whom have put through hell for this. I really admire the women who say, decently, with intellectual rigor and with considerable fortitude, no, no, you don't get to do that. You don't get to tell women what we are. You haven't had our experiences. You're not us. No. And there's just, I mean, I give some example. I give a hero's roll call out in the book of some of the women who this is the case with. And nobody has to be unpleasant to anyone, but there are certain things which, no, you don't get to do.
And some medications and things that are happening with young people, and you talk about some of the stories in the book.
Yeah, some of that is, well...
But there are some things we can and should do in the trans movement, in the trans community, that are logical.
We need to weigh them up very carefully.
Okay.
Very carefully. I think the facts are going to matter enormously. Let me give one example of why. When children are growing up, what's one of the strange things that happens in childhood? But the moments when you think that the fantasy world is real, and the moments when then you sort of know it isn't, but you get little glimmers of could be. The Harry Potter-like things. That why does magic matter to children? Because the thing, and as you know, a child, if you take them to the theatre or something, they see a trick on stage, but they've never seen it in real life. They've seen it on film. They've never seen it on the stage. It's like somebody disappears. I took one of my godchildren to show recently. Somebody disappeared on stage. Well, I knew it was a trapdoor, a puff of smoke in a trapdoor. She was... Because you're like, it's real. Yeah, it happened. There's magic. Okay. So children are very... When they're working in the world, if you say to a child, well, you are a boy, but you can become a girl if you want. Or you're a girl, but that's fine, you can be a boy anytime. Well, I can what? No, I know a lot of children, a lot of parents who've told me how disturbed their children have been at this suggestion. But I'm more concerned with the people who would believe the suggestion. Because this is all presented as if it's really quite simple, and it's not simple. It's not simple. It's not straightforward for somebody born a male to become an approximation of a female. And it's really hard for a woman to pass off as a man and have a, let's just say, a successful sex life as a man.
Yeah.
Penises don't just grow from skin grafts from the arm. And, you know, this is all presented. This is what I mind. I mind the lie that it's sort of straightforward. Hey, you could decide to change sex.
What do we do about our technology, Douglas?
We have to find a way to derange ourselves. And I think that we should go to wisdom we all knew till yesterday, in that before the age of the internet, there were lots of things that went wrong. It's not like human nature was great until Twitter. But it's massively exacerbated. It sped everything up. But how about we just take some of the lessons that we had in the past? I don't know if your mother ever told you this, but I was always told always sleep on an angry letter. Remember that?
Yeah.
You know, just
give it 24 hours.
Keep it till the morning, read it in the morning, and send it off then if you still think. But in the age of Twitter, how about doing that? How about not? I try to practice this. I think I succeed. My first instinct is not always correct, and if my first instinct is unpleasant, to try not to do it.
Okay.
Just sleep on it.
Is that the way we should behave on social?
Well, another way, I say this in the end of the book, is face-to-face interaction is vital. I've been rather promiscuous in my life in public debate and contesting ideas, and with a really quite bewildering array of opponents. And when you meet somebody face to face, you always learn something that you would never have learned without that opportunity. And sometimes, in fact, very often, almost always, there are things you just wouldn't do once you've had the person in front of you, you know? Because you can't, social media makes people dehumanize other people, whether it's a dating app where you flick, or whether it's a Twitter thing where you like pile in on that person who's wrong thought today. All of these things, if you see the person, if you've ever seen them, been eye to eye, you wouldn't join in that stampede, or you wouldn't join in so easily. You wouldn't just dismiss them as a person so easily. Because you know this is a person with thoughts, feelings, intuitions, loved ones, loves, problems, hates, everything, a human being. And that's why, there's a portion in de Tocqueville where he notes this about the early years of the American Republic. He's struck by the face-to-face interaction that exists then in America. Now, today we are losing that, but we can get it back. You know, I've been one of the great joys of my life in recent years has been young audiences growing. I'm sure you have this. People coming out to things and, they're smart. And you don't have to agree on everything, but they know the things you should be thinking about. They know the things they want to be thinking about. And I think about this time last year, Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris and I were doing some events together in Dublin and London. And I started then asking people in audiences, go out in the interval or whatever, and say,
Did you host their thing at the O2?
Yeah, that's
you?
right.
Okay, I was there that night.
I said to people there and others, I said, why are you here? And I've been doing it at other friends' events. A friend, Rod Little, a journalist, was in the audience I was in the audience of something he did in London, packed out the London Palladium, 2,000 people. And I went to the pub with some of the audience after, and wanted to know what they thought and what they were doing and so on. And I discovered two really moving things, because almost all the responses have versions of these two things. The first is, I'm fed up of sitting in my room watching YouTube videos, and I want to meet the other people. It's not like who agree with me, but other people who are thinking about the same things and want to come to the answers on some of the same things. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, and this is it's very moving. They say that they want to see somebody speaking the truth. They want to be near somebody speaking the truth as they see it. They want to witness it happening because they'd like to do it in their own lives. In their job, in their education, with their girlfriend, with their boyfriend. They'd like to be able to say things that are true. And they think, and they're right, that if somebody is being honest in front of them, they will be honest in turn. They will have more courage to try it out. And they're right. They're absolutely right. And I know this from my own life. Like, if you surround yourself with courageous people, you will be more courageous. If you surround yourself with cowards, you'll be more cowardly, definitely. But if you try to orient your life towards braver people and people who tell the truth, and we're not living in a totalitarian system, so it shouldn't be hard. But if you do that, your chances of living in truth yourself are a lot higher, a lot higher. And I just find this a wonderful thing.
Yeah, and that's why 8,000 people came out to see you at the O2 that night.
Yeah.
Because I think they're not used to anyone telling them the truth. And
Yeah.
you got Sam and you and Jordan up there that are going against the grain, and something feels intuitively right about this. And Jordan was here the next day, and he said, Brian, we're discovering that people aren't as stupid as we thought they were.
Oh, yeah,
that they want to engage in a nuanced, long-form conversation.
It's the other part of this, one of the most beautiful things, you know. People like me used to be pessimists.
Yeah.
I'm not a pessimist anymore about this because exactly of this. The counter-revolution is underway. And it's really smart. It's really smart. It's totally bucked all the trends. You know, like the media companies, all the established, the old media, all thought the future was like 3-minute head-to-heads between two twats who didn't agree with each other, were never going to agree with each other, and just going to perform a seal-like thing. And that's the most the public can cope with, because the public has sort of low attention span, low IQ, and so on. That's basically the assumption.
Yes.
And then it turns out, no. They're smart. They want to know more. They don't want lies. They don't want this performance art, bad performance art as well. They want to hear long-form discussions, talking about the things that are real and matter, and are interesting, and are going to affect their lives. And that's just a terrific thing.
Yeah. It's a beautiful thing, and I think long-form conversations like this help. And Jordan was saying that, you know, having these, you know, multiple-hour conversations like you've had on Rogan and Harris and stuff just gets people really used to this, and now they can go to an event and have that same experience.
And also, everywhere I go in the world, people are at the same bit of it. They're pushing against the same issues. I was speaking in Reykjavik the other week for Icelandic translation of my last book, and walking down a street in Reykjavik, some Viking guy comes in, a very nice local guy comes over and says, "Oh, you're Douglas Murray, aren't you?" Yeah. You know, watched you on this YouTube thing. So what do you think is going to be the... And he's right up, he's right where everyone else is. And, I mean, I'm not... Reykjavik's a great city and everything, but, you know, you're sort of a far-flung place. But this is terrific. I mean, this is... Because it means that we could answer lots of things we need to answer. We could get to the truth. And it could have a really important impact, because it means it is happening everywhere. Everyone is able, wherever they're based, to get up to speed at the same rate. Yeah. We can do an immense amount of good with that, as a species, as people.
You're optimistic.
I'm optimistic about that. I mean, I can out-pessimist anyone on certain subjects, but on this, it's fantastic.
What do we do about our tech companies? Because, like you said, without even knowing it, like you mentioned those Google search images things. I would have gone, okay, Twitter is biased, this is biased. I never would have thought my Google image search might have been that way. How can we, first of all, be aware of it, and second of all, demand more from these companies that we basically pay with our attention and our information?
I don't have a wholesale answer to it, but we need to know what they're doing, accept it, accept where we can't change it, make new things, do other things, not give them things for free, punish them when they go wrong, and lots more. But I mean, they are magnificent demonstrations of the problem of human beings, you know. I mean, not to get all religious on you, because I'm not, but there's a line St. Paul says in one of his letters, you know, that which I would not, that I do, and that I do, that I would not. spells it out in words of one syllable. We're not that straightforward as people, are we? There are all sorts of things we wish we could do, we did do, and we don't. And then there are other things we know we shouldn't do, and we do. And the tech companies, in really impressive fashion, have demonstrated that. Like, you set out not to do evil, and you do really quite evil things.
Are you quoting Google's?
Couldn't possibly say
Couldn't
which
possibly.
company I had
The
in
strange
mind.
thing is this will be broadcast on YouTube to people all around the world.
Oh,
they can
yeah.
digest this entire thing.
You'll be demonetized like
Yeah,
that
exactly.
when they
And
say my
then
name's on it.
At the same
Yeah.
time, I'll probably be demonetized and maybe not in the search algorithm. And I mean, I've had people on the show where the comments say, "Brian, enjoy the shadow ban." You know,
Yes,
because
yeah,
you've
of
had them
course.
on. I mean, I told you I had Ike on recently, and just like, enjoy the shadow ban. So now,
Who did you have on?
David Icke.
Oh, well, he's a nutter.
Yeah, although funny enough, says some similar truths. Like I was telling you before, he had a clip with us called the Transgender Agenda, who basically said all of this stuff is dividing us. So we will argue amongst each other, and we can be controlled.
Does he still do the lizards thing?
He does mention the lizard thing. Yeah, it's
That's
out
where
there.
he and I would definitely divide.
And with me too. But like 90% of the other stuff he says, I have a really hard time arguing with it because it's about perception and what you've been taught to think
Right.
versus what you might inherently believe to be real.
But you would have got. I mean, presumably, he would be shadow man in some way.
I would think so.
But the
I don't know.
demonetization is fascinating.
Yeah.
Because that's really insidious. That I mean, this sort of hoovering up, this using of people's talents. I mean, producers and camera people, and this hoovering up of their work by an organization that's making money from them, that then stops them from making the money. So this is really ugly capitalism in the guise of something that's not that capitalist. It's really ugly capitalism.
It's warfare out there. And like you said, the only way to fight back is to fight back.
And new
challenge them.
platforms and all that. But
Yeah.
it's obviously everyone's weighing it up because you got to weigh up obviously the reach you can have versus the money that you can afford to lose by YouTube basically making your content free when it's your own intellectual endeavor and but maybe everyone can just do a lot of good and we'll get our rewards, if not in heaven, then somehow.
Yeah, perhaps.
Not
Maybe.
in a check.
I think the message maybe is more important. You mentioned Aziz Ansari. I don't know if you've seen his latest comedy special on Netflix. It's really interesting.
Oh, I must watch
because
that.
he speaks about all of that stuff for the first time in 2 years. And it's really fascinating. It's actually really good. And it's really personal. But he brings some things up and he says, some things we did on Parks and Recreation, which was like his big comedy show 10 years ago, he said, maybe that wouldn't be okay today. And he was kind of bringing up these things that even things that he was a part of today would be looked at as racist or homophobic or all those things. And I'm just wondering, how do we approach the subject of like forgiveness? Because I know that's something in your book.
Well, as I say, one is to have a more forgiving attitude towards the past. That doesn't mean you say the past is right, obviously not, but to have a more appropriate attitude towards it. Because to do that is, among other things, a request to what comes after us to be gentle with us. Because we know we'll be making mistakes. We know we'll be doing things wrong. I've been a writer for 20 years, and masses of things have changed. I've made mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. But it's not until you've done them that you realize, of course, that's because that's what everyone in the past was going through. I have a favorite quote from Milan Kundera, who I mentioned earlier. He said somewhere, he said in Testaments Betrayed, he said, mankind walks in a fog. We stumble along a path and we make the path as we go. And that's not the interesting point. The point that's interesting is he says, when we look back, we see the path, we see the man, but we don't see the fog. Everything looks inevitable once you've been through it because it's happened. But as you're going through it, all you can do is to have the brightest lights shining that you've got and tread carefully. Don't just like stampede, fueled by self-righteousness and certainty. So that's one thing. Be forgiving towards the past, have a better attitude towards the past, because we'll need that forgiveness in due course ourselves. And I think this is also, I think this is also something which is an enervating thing for people. I'm obsessed with one little thing that's happened recently, which is a war on Winston Churchill that keeps happening. Portions of the left that keep doing this in Britain, they attack Winston Churchill for various things. Now, Winston Churchill was a man, and he made a number of very big mistakes in his life. He also saved civilization. And occasionally you get these people. We had one in Britain with the Shadow Chancellor, John MacDonnell, was recently asked whether Winston Churchill was a hero or a villain. And he said, Tony Pandy, villain. This was blaming him for the police action against some miners in 1910, and one miner died. And,
oh yeah, I remember that.
now, see, there's two things that are interesting about this. The first is, what you're really doing is you're attacking Winston Churchill because you know that Winston Churchill in some way is the core of something at the root of being British today, because like we have lots of uncertainties. We always have. We have lots that we've got wrong. We know that. But we're proud of that. You know, we're proud of that. If we hadn't have had Winston Churchill and this country hadn't have stood up, the world would look totally different. I doubt there'd be any Jews. And that's something to be proud of, to have stopped that. So when somebody attacks Churchill, we have something, we know what they're trying to get us at the root of what is one of our certainties, to demoralize us. But the second thing in some ways is more interesting to me, is my problem with this is that it is enervating, particularly for young people, because none of us in our lives are going to do something as important as what Churchill did then. Knowing that if he failed, he would be killed, everybody he loved would be killed, everything he'd ever loved would be destroyed, and the most evil thing in history would triumph. We are not going to have the opportunity to make a stand, let alone win, as he did. But if that counts as nothing, because you once made a mistake, there's no point in acting in this world. None. And I think that any young person looking at a system set up like that, err once, fail once, stumble once, and even saving civilization will not save you. Well, why not just not do anything?
Yeah, it's well put, well put. A couple things about you. How do you write?
How do I write? As Ian McEwan once said, there's only when people say, how do you write? There's only one answer. Turn off your email. I love writing. I love getting to truths and things, and so I do it all the time. Read and talk with friends and churn up ideas and write. And if I'm writing a book, I lock myself away and I become very, very antisocial. And I say no to lots of things. And doesn't mean your life stops, but you know. But I'm incredibly lucky. I'm really lucky. That's a bit of luck I count. I get to do what I like. And I get to write about what I think. You know. So that's how I do it.
I hear it's very solitary when you're writing a book.
Yeah, yeah, it is. But you know, some writers go mad because you're sort of, you know, shut away and not speaking to anyone, and then suddenly you're shoved in front of a camera and then you're locked away again. I don't have that. I mean, I'm very sociable, and lots of friends, and I don't become a total hermit.
If I were to ask all your friends, some of the people maybe at your party last night, what is Douglas's superpower? How are you able to get all these things done? What would they say about you? What would they say it is?
Depends how well they know me. I don't know. I never spend any time thinking about what other people think about me. I never have. I've always found it just not that useful.
Your parents teach you that, or something you were born with?
I don't know. I have wonderful parents, wonderful family. We always argued things out. We always contested. We always had dinner around the same dinner table, and my brother and I argue on everything. And that's probably where some of that started. But to try to answer your question, I don't know. I'm driven. I've always been driven. And that can be tricky for people around you because not everyone has much drive, let alone a lot. And it can be exhausting for other people around you. I know that. I've learned that.
Be exhausting for you too sometimes, maybe.
I'm not so bothered about that.
Okay. All right.
But, you know, it's very easy to analyze other people's actions, very hard to analyze your own. And as I say, I don't spend much time thinking about myself, really. But one of the only ways I could answer your question is some years ago, somebody said to me, after some event or something, somebody said, I don't know, it was in America, somebody said, why do you do what you do? I don't understand. And there was a friend who's also a writer who was sitting nearby, and I sort of was fumbling around and being sort of, I don't know. And his friend leapt in and said, Douglas has a very low tolerance threshold for lies. I really like that. If I have a gravestone, I wouldn't mind that being on it. I think most of the people who I know and love, and who I'd like to think love me, would probably say that that's, you know, and I've got myself in all sorts of trouble in my life for this strange defect, but I've had an awful lot of fun along the way as well.
So calling people out on lies and saying the truth, that's what you...
Yeah, and I'd like to think I'm loyal. I'd like to think I'm loyal. I stick up for my friends. And I like loyalty. And I try to do it. Yeah. So I'd like to think they probably say I drink too much.
Like any good writer in England from the old school.
Or at least, as my late friend Christopher Hitchens used to say, nobody would say I drink too little.
Do you miss him?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's that line, I'm very fond of T.S. Eliot. There's a line in T.S. Eliot, he says, I think in the Four Quartets, he says, as we grow older, the world becomes stranger, the pattern more complicated of dead and living. And you know this. The pattern becomes more complicated. And I've been so lucky in my friends in my life. And not entirely luck, I've also migrated towards people who I like and admire, you know. Sort them out. You know, often heroes become friends. Christopher and I, it was a slightly strange one. He reviewed my first book and then we became friends. But there are people like him, as I say. I mean, sometimes there are people who are well known. Sometimes there are people who were never well known themselves. But as you grow older, you think, oh, I wish I could share that with him. And that I think that sometimes with Christopher. Yeah. There are times I've thought, oh, he would have loved this. But I think that with a number of departed friends.
What did you learn from him, like watching him over the years?
Well, I was very lucky that when I was starting out as a writer, there were two people in particular that I was sort of caught between, or at least caught up with. And One was Christopher, who were sort of big influences. One was Christopher, another was Roger Scruton, who's happily still alive. And obviously Christopher is of the left and Roger is of the right, and they have very little in common in all sorts of ways. But I just love them and revere them both, and admire them. I don't know. I mean, you pick up, as I say, you pick up things from the people you admire because you see, again, as I was saying earlier, about migrate towards people you admire. Christopher, oh God, I mean, you never bloody let go. Never let go. You know, I mean,
of a point, an argument, or
yeah, I'm more emollient than Christopher. There are some things that he would do. I mean, where you thought, God, I can't believe you're pushing that. You know, there are times when I would lay off, maybe when he probably wouldn't. But oh yeah, I mean, I've told this story before. But the only time I ever incurred Christopher's ire was that I once, around 2006 or so, when Iraq was going very badly. Had been at a breakfast that morning with Henry Kissinger, and Henry said something which was, I thought, useful to the argument that Christopher was making about Iraq, when he knew that he was in trouble with the argument. Everyone knew, I mean, that Iraq was a disaster by that. Anyhow, and I remember thinking, and I was seeing Christopher that day for lunch. I thought I'll tell him that. And I said to Christopher, "Oh, by the way, I saw Henry Kissinger for breakfast." And the moment I said it, I could just see him, because of course Chris Kissinger was one of his great hates. I could just see him. And as I started relaying what the good doctor had said, I just knew that. And eventually got to the end of it. Chris just spat out, "Didn't need Kissinger to tell us that." And I thought, he never let go. Once a thing was between his teeth. But I've been so lucky with friends. I mean, there are other wonderful people. Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who's a friend of Christopher's as well, who's a friend of mine still. A wonderful, wonderful woman, one of the bravest people. And but just all around the world, I've met wonderful, brave people, and some of whom are not famous at all and never will be celebrated. But it's just one of the great joys of my life, you know.
What was the best day of your life and the worst day of your life?
Gosh. I'm very wary about answering things too personally. Mainly because I think you've got to be careful what you put out there, because it can always come back and be used against you. So I'm quite private in that. I don't want to say what the worst day of my life was.
Okay.
The best, I don't know, it's very hard. One thing I would say is, my experience of life is that it just gets better. And this isn't common, maybe, but when I was at school, I just wanted to get out into the world. And when I was at university, I published my first book in my second year, and I was out into the world. I didn't want to be at university, I just wanted to get out. And then it took me a long time to establish myself, and establish my career, but it just got better and better. I got freer and freer. Now, I said this recently to a friend. He said, "Gosh, you're lucky that that's how it feels." And I realized that wasn't his experience of life. But that's how it feels to me. It's I could complain, but I don't. I mean, it's a wonderful thing to do what you love, and that's why I always say to particularly young people who ask me advice, I say, throw yourself at the thing you know you want to do and be. Because the worst is that you'll fall short. So you'll probably fall short, we all do. The worst thing is that you'll fall quite a long way short. But that's a hell of a lot better than aiming yourself at something you don't want and making it, you know. And it works.
I agree. I mean, for me, life gets better. I feel like I understand myself better, and yeah, for me, it just keeps getting better every year. But maybe it's because I'm doing what I love too. Maybe not everyone is doing that.
And yes, that's true, but maybe also the older you get. I turned 40 this year. You'll get there, of course. But it's there's just everything is so fascinating. You know, it's why I travel a lot. It's never boring. It's never boring. Even the slightly boring places are interesting that they're boring.
Right.
You know, like interesting that nothing happens in this particular place. Like, you know,
that's a good perspective. What scares you?
I don't know. I'm not mad. I'm not like wildly irresponsible with my safety or anything like that. The only time in my career that I have been scared, maybe I don't know if I should say this, oh well, was 4 years ago after a massacre at the offices of Charlie Hebdo, because I knew people there, and a couple of weeks after that I was at a theatre in London and came out in the interval, my phone was buzzing, and it was, because it had been off, the names of the people who were texting weren't clear, and just it became clear there'd been another shooting and another. There were some friends in Copenhagen at a free speech event, and another terrorist had come and shot them up. And they were just texting to say that they were alive. And it's the only time I've ever felt, I think it's one of the only times I've ever felt scared. I didn't think I'd ever stop. But I thought then, oh no, it's going to keep happening.
To other people or to you? Or
well, by then the police had told me not to appear in public and things like that.
Right. That's scary.
But that doesn't, I'm not bothered with that, because what will be will be. But yeah, that was worrying, because I just thought, God, this keeps happening. Yeah.
What would we be surprised to learn about Douglas Murray? Some guilty pleasure or some non-authorish, spectatorish thing that you do?
I don't know. There are mundane things like going to the gym.
You go every day, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Okay. And that's a game changer for you?
It's good. I turn my mind off. Sometimes people are surprised that I'm nicer than I seem.
I could see that. Why do they think that way?
Well, because actually, I mean, I think Roger Scruton at an event we did recently was asked by a member of the audience something about me, and I can't remember. And he said something like, Douglas is a harmless person, and somebody else in the audience said, why would you say that? What does it mean? And Roger, it was very embarrassing for me, because I was sitting in a hall with a couple of thousand people with Roger talking about me. But he said something very funny. He said Douglas is essentially, I think I'm going to get this right. He said, Douglas is essentially an agreeable person who's been bullied into being disagreeable by disagreeable people. That was very perceptive.
That's good.
I want to get on with people. I'm you know, I sort of,
but you
I
don't
pretty much get on with anyone. But
as long as there's no lies.
As long as there's no lies, and then just it's hell for everyone.
Brings out the superhero in you.
Right. Yeah.
And what keeps you awake at night?
Oh, regrets, I suppose. Yeah. Never keeps me awake. Yeah, you worry in the night, of course. Yeah, you regret things, you play things over in your mind, things you could have, as a person, been a better person. Things you should have said, things you forgot to say, things you can't say now.
Are you hopeful on the future of the planet, the species, everybody?
Too big a question, but neither an optimist nor a pessimist, other than on a case-by-case scenario.
That's well said. Douglas, at the end, I always ask people a few last questions. If you could pick up a kind of a magic phone and call up the 20-year-old Douglas and give that young man a bit of advice, what would you tell him? And where were you? University.
Yeah, I was at university. I think it would be personal advice. I think there's a lot of things you just, if you'd known it about relationships, if you'd known about it earlier, it takes a long time to navigate personal relationships with other people meaningful. It takes a long time to work it out, to know what you're doing. I'd have given myself relationship advice, including not to worry so much, you know. When you're 20, you think, oh, I'm never going to meet the right person, you know.
Yeah.
And I think I'd say to myself, don't worry about that. It'll come.
On that same note, best advice you ever received? Could come from a parent or a professor or Christopher Hitchens, anyone.
Best advice I ever received. Well, I might dodge that and just give you what is a, not a total dodge, but a career piece of advice. When I was starting out, I wrote, my first book was on literature, and I was writing reviews for The Spectator. And the then editor was Boris Johnson.
The following success secrets are only available inside the London Real Tribe, where you get exclusive access and insights from our high-performance guests on wealth creation, productivity, leadership, morning routines, health, and well-being. To join our tribe community, go to londonreal.tv/tribe. Now, let's continue with the show.
And of course,
good point.
It's a really good point. Because, you know, I was all used to, well, we could see this, and on the other hand, you could see this, and in a very real sense, and I see this, well, I didn't know. This was a really good piece of advice. So you've got to make it good. You've got to make it enjoyable. You've got to make, they've got to want to read it, and all that. Nobody tells you that. And that was really good advice. And I'll always be grateful to him for that. It took a lot of work after that for me to get it right. But yeah, that was a good piece of career advice.
And what do we not know about Boris? What's he really like?
I don't know him well enough. I think he's, in my view, he's exactly what you see. And the flaws and the virtues are all out there.
And you
we all know them.
And you appreciate that.
Yeah, I think he's a very remarkable figure. He's the only person in politics in my adult lifetime who, when you, maybe it's not the case now, but it used to be the case that if you mentioned his name, people felt better. That's a very unusual trait in a politician. Yeah. No one ever said, oh, Philip Hammond.
Did you?
Theresa. You know? But if you, Boris, they liked him. I think there's still residue. There's a lot of anger about the referendum. Obviously, we've got to get over that. We've got to get over the anger. But yeah, that's a really remarkable trait to make people feel better as a politician.
Yeah, you kind of forget about that sometimes, don't you?
Yeah.
What did you think of his book on Churchill?
Haven't read it.
I quite liked it. It was a very political book, but I thought it was pretty good.
I read Andrew Roberts' magisterial biography of Churchill recently.
Okay.
That's a book.
Yeah, okay. Politics for you ever?
I suppose I can't say I never thought about it, but most of my life, it's not been possible to be a politician and tell the truth. Be out in a nanosecond.
Yeah.
Even if I managed to get in, I'd have the whip withdrawn on the second day.
Too much truth. Last part of that question, to that 20-year-old that's been watching and listening to us, advice to them. They're in this strange world. They were born into this world, a lot of them, where it's a thing. Like, I wasn't born into this world, you know. There was nobody chatting, there was no Twitter, there was none of this. Advice to them, if they read this and they're like, okay, well, how would you say they move forward?
Well, I give in the last chapter, as you know, some of the ways out that we think of as. But I think that one of the most important ones is first of all, don't do things which will demoralize you. Don't do things that you'll be ashamed of. And hold your stock high. Higher than the era tells you to hold it. Don't put everything out there. Don't cheapen yourself. Keep something back of yourself. And one piece of advice I was not given in person, but one of the great joys of reading is that, of course, you get the advice from centuries of people who've been thinking before you. One of my favorite quotes is a quote from Schiller. He says somewhere, "Be a part of your age, but do not be its creature." And I say that to anyone. Be a part of your age, engage yourself in it completely, immerse yourself in it, but don't be its creature. If there's lots about it you don't want to be a part of, don't have any part of it. Be a part of another age.
Which is kind of what this is about. Douglas, I think this book's going to do very well. I think you might know that as well. It's called The Madness of Crowds. I'm guessing people can pick it up on booksellers, Amazon, all of that stuff.
Yeah, if you can find a bookshop these days, you could buy it in there.
Yeah, there's that too.
But Amazon and all these things, of course.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're going to be traveling the world, talking to people,
Sure.
Australia, US, that kind of thing, right? I will be honest, I was hesitant on having you on the show. I think I watched some clips and I didn't know if I liked you.
Oh, wow.
And I'm really glad I did have you on. I really appreciate what you're saying in this book, and I appreciate that you're telling the truth, and I appreciate you're saying hard things that are going to be unpopular for some people, and that you're willing to even potentially offend them. And I appreciate that. And I appreciate people like you and Jordan Peterson that come on and just say, and I hate to put you in this thing, but even David Icke that says, look, if you think something is wrong, say so. That's one of the simplest things he said at the end of the episode. Say it. Don't feel like you can't, that you're going to be out of step. If you really believe intuitively, and I'm always pointing toward my heart here, wait a second, no, this isn't right. You should say that. And I think that's how we move forward in this whole world. And when we're not doing that, that's how we don't. And I guess that's probably what your book is about. Yeah. So thank you for that, and really enjoyed my time with you, and all the best.
It's been a great pleasure. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Douglas.